crowds had a little too much fun this weekend, is catching up to them today. Whose idea was to put me on stage on Sunday morning, the day of our Lord?
Easter, no less.
So before we get started, let's make a TikTok together. You want to make a TikTok? Thank you. It's okay. Mommy, baby, marshmallows. Okay. Good morning, fellow heretics, and welcome to the American Atheists Convention 2023. Real quick, I would encourage everybody watching to find a local organization, a local group to get involved with and get active in. And if you haven't been paying attention to the news lately, there are a lot of Christian nationalists out there trying very hard to take your rights away from you, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a person of color, especially if you're a member of the LGBTQ community. So get out there, let them know that they're in the find out stage. Come on, guys. Clicker thing, here we go. Okay, before I get started, I always like to preface that I don't consider myself a scholar. I have the degree, if anything, I'm an internet micro-propagandist, but a scholar, not so much. But I did send this speech to 3 scholar friends of mine to vet for accuracy. When I tell you I could have shit diamonds, I was so nervous to send that email. But they all sent me back some very helpful notes. This is them. Dr. Alexiana Fry, Dr. Dan McClellan, and Dr. Kip Davis. Dr. Kip is the one who discovered the Dead Sea Scroll fragments that were purchased by Hobby Lobbies were forgeries. He's a good friend of mine, and I've gotten to interview each of them on my YouTube channel multiple times, and they're some of the coolest people I've ever gotten to interact with. So if you get the chance and you're into this sort of thing, highly recommend checking out their content. They're not hard to find. Oh no, my computer's going to sleep. Worst timing ever. Okay. So we're going to begin our story in Genesis 28. Jacob falls asleep in a city called Luz. Using a rock as a pillow, he had a dream. In his dream, the Lord said to him, I am the Lord, that is Yahweh, the God of your fathers. I'm going to give this land to you and your descendants. When he woke up, he poured oil on the rock that he was using as a pillow and renamed the city Bethel. Remember the name Bethel, which means the house of God. Real quick before I say anything else, some people, damn it, computer, it's not what you're supposed to do. They've been all the way to the top for no reason. I'm useless without my notes. Some people think it's offensive to the Jewish community to use the name Yahweh. I'm going to be saying a lot, so I just want to put this out here first. Setting aside the fact that I'm an atheist and I don't believe him. I've heard a lot of practicing Jews, including rabbis, who do not consider this offensive because that's not his name. They don't know how to say his name during the Babylonian exile, which is between 597 and 538 BCE. It became taboo to say his name, so an entire generation went by and they don't remember how to say it. It's spelled YHWH or Yahweh, and so saying Yahweh isn't as offensive as some people seem to think it is. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm open to being wrong, but I did check to see. So where is Luz? Well, according to Genesis 56, it's a city in a land called Canaan. Jacob came to Luz, it says, which is the land of Canaan, and he and all the people were with him. So imagine you're a Canaanite living in this foreign guy comes by, and he lays down the road and takes a nap with a rock as a pillow, and then he wakes up, does some weird stuff with some oil to it, and he comes up to you and he's like, hey, so I don't know how to put this, but I'm just going to say it. God is going to give me your city. I know, that was my reaction too, so weird, right? So he essentially claimed this is not historical fact, this is mythology, so keep that in mind. So what do we know about Canaan? Well, not very much. Until the year 1928, where the lost city of Ugarit, which is modern-day Syria, was accidentally unearthed, and several fragments of ancient poetry were discovered. These texts are several centuries older than the earliest texts of the Bible, and when studying them, there's parallels it has with the biblical texts are impossible to go unnoticed. These parallels provide a lot of answers to questions that biblical scholars have struggled with for a long time. And with this new information, they were able to create a much better picture as to how the Christian God came to be what he is today, and how the concepts of divine worship changed into what it looks like today. So let's start discussing these parallels with the divine council. I wanted to do something funny for this slide, so it was like, what is everybody sitting for right now? Oh, Pedro. So this motif is found in probably the most famous of these ancient poems ever discovered, called the Bow Cycle. In this passage, we see a great feast, and there's 4 tiers of divine beings represented that are all seated in the divine realm, separate from the human realm. I'm going to go through them quickly, and then we're going to go back and take a closer look. At the top of the tier, ruling over them was El, along with his wife, Asher, which we're going to talk about later. In the second tier were their children, the 70 sons of Asher, or Atharat, is the Hebrew name. And they were given dominion over different tribes and different people groups throughout the land. In the third tier is a little bit of a mystery. There's one figure called, his name is Kuthat Wakasis, and he does a number of things in service to Baal, specifically. He makes weapons for him, helps him build his temple, but he's also presented as being wiser than him and giving him counsel. So it's a little strange, that tier. But the lower tier is just general servants, both male and female, and still divine beings, and angels, or messengers. Remember, the word angel comes from the Greek word angelos, and means messenger. That's literally what they are. Switching them from the Bow cycle, the divine hierarchy into which we see happening throughout the Old Testament, is that of a more monotheistic form of worship begins to develop as these 4 tiers are collapsed into one. Let's take a look at how that happened, starting with what biblical scholars believe to be one of the oldest passages in the Bible. But that's not it. That's the Bow cycle. There we go. Yeah, I've got to get this slide. That's one of the fragments that were discovered containing the Bow cycle. It's fragmented. It's funny when you read it. It's almost like you're talking to someone on the phone that's going through a tower or a tunnel. It's like that, and then you worship, and it's funny. But there's still large chunks where you get a good idea of what's going on. I wish we had all of it, though. It'd be so cool. It's a very fun story. Deuteronomy 32:8-9. When the Most High, anytime you hear the word Most High, it's referring to El, not Yahweh. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of man, when he set boundaries to the people according to the sons of Israel, for the Lord's portion of his people, Jacob, is his allotted inheritance. So here we have El giving Yahweh Israel as his allotted inheritance. Let's go back a bit. I'm not doing very well with my slides. Let's go back a little bit to this phrase, sons of Israel. What is that supposed to mean? Well, in an older translation that's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically 4Q Isaiah 37, this passage actually says sons of gods. Sons of the gods. Shout out to Dr. Kip Davis for showing me this. So cool. So I love when Christians say that the Bible wasn't changed. Like, bitch, it was changed immediately. Immediately. So here we see a clear distinction between El and Yahweh, as Yahweh's attributes, as Yahweh distributes nations among the children and they rule over them. However, in a later passage, set in the same divine council scene, it reads a little bit different. This is Psalms 82. God takes his position in his assembly. He judges in the midst of the gods. How long will you judge unjustly, and how partiality to the wicked? Vindicate the weak and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and destitute. Rescue the weak and needy, save them from the land of the wicked. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, and all of you are sons of the Most High. Not sons, not my sons, sons of the Most High. Nevertheless, you will all die like men. Again, he's talking to gods here. You will all die like men. You will fall like the ones of the princes. Arise, O God, and judge the earth, for you possess all of the nations. So here is the Yahweh standing in the role of El, rather than distributing the nations. He tells them all that they're going to die, and he alone is going to rule over all of them. So we can see how Yahweh assumes the role of El in other places as well. So let's continue. Very famous story, Exodus 3:14, a famous scene in the burning bush, where this is actually a messenger of Yahweh, not Yahweh himself. Calls himself, I am that I am, which is only one possible translation of the phrase. Another possible translation is, I am that I will become, which I think is more accurate, but topic for another day. But it makes more sense given the next phrase. Here he comes representing himself. I am the Lord, Yahweh. He continues and says, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, or God Almighty. According to Dr. Alexiana Fry, my friend, she said this can also be translated as, or understood to be God, a God of many breasts. So the idea is all providing, that kind of thing. Haven't gotten a little more into that, actually, so. But he says, I didn't make my name known to you, or known to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, except we just saw in Genesis 32 that he did tell Jacob his name. So what's happening here? So this means that either it was a later interpolation by a later scribe, or God's a liar. So in any case, what this means is that the patriarchal fathers were not worshiping Yahweh. They were worshiping El the entire time. That's very significant. If you recall through the passages, the narratives throughout Exodus, Yahweh was constantly troubled with people returning to worship the gods of their ancestors, those being Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But I thought the ancestors were worshiping this God all along, but apparently they're going back and worshiping older gods, so it's a whole thing. But we see this most famously in the scene of the golden calf in Exodus 32. Moses leaves to pray, and while he's gone, instructed by his brother, the high priest Aaron, he tells everybody else there, well, quick, Moses is gone, let's do our thing. And he tells them to melt down all the jewelry that they have in order so that they can make a golden calf for them to worship. Moses finds out about this, he gets mad, he goes and tells God, because I guess God's not omniscient after all. He didn't know this was happening, and he got very mad when Moses told him. And he was going to kill them all, but Moses told him not to, so he was like, all right, not this time. So who is the El? Or who is El? Who is the bull? So it's most likely El. El is depicted as a bull in the Ugaritic text, and he's even called Bull El several times in the Val cycle. And he's even called Bull El, or he's called Bull. Oops, getting ahead of myself. I'm missing a slide. That's okay. In Genesis 49, he's called the Bull of Jacob, even though if you look in your English Bibles, it's translated to the Mighty One of Jacob. But the original is actually Bull El, or Bull of Jacob. These are some examples of El's characteristics being assimilated into Yahweh. Now, back to the pantheon, we have El and his wife named Asherah. They were worshipped alongside each other, and she was worshipped independently from him. So, for example, in 1 Kings 18:19, there are 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. And one of my favorite biblical stories in Jeremiah 44:19, or 44:15 through 19, I'm just going to read it. Then all the men were aware that their wives were burning sacrifices to other gods, along with all the women who were standing by as a large assembly, including all the people who were living in the Parthos of the land of Egypt, responded to Jeremiah, saying, these are women speaking to the prophet Jeremiah. As for the message that you have spoken to us in the name of your Lord, we are not going to listen to you. We're not going to listen to you, but we will certainly carry out every word that has proceeded from our mouths. In other words, these women are taking charge here. We're going to make the decisions as to who we're worshiping. We're not going to listen to you. And they give the reason why, right next. But by the burning sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven, that's Asherah, and pouring out drink offerings to her, just as we ourselves, our forefathers, our kings, and our leaders did in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, for then we had plenty of food, and we were well off. We saw no misfortune. But since we stopped burning sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything, and we've been met by the sword and by famine. In other words, Asherah was taking better care of her people than Yahweh was. But the Yahweh's cult were trying to force them to stop giving her sacrifices and worship Yahweh instead, and they weren't having it. So this is a strange passage, because while Asherah is being glorified here, the rest of the Bible is far more focused on demonizing her, as it is only when King Josiah comes in with reform, the narrative starts to shift. 2 Kings 23:4-7. The king commands the high priest to remove the vessels that they have made for Baal, Asherah, the sun, the moon, the constellations, and the hosts of heaven, and they burn their ashes and carry them to Bethel. Now this line is repeated, but it only focuses on Asherah next, and it's way more harsh. This is that Asherah was burned, and then her ashes were ground into dust, and then the dust was thrown into the graves of the common people. Way harsher a sentence than Battle God, the sun god, the moon god, the constellation god. None of them got that shit. She was just, they were not nice to her. But he take it a step further. Yesterday, Seth Andrews was talking about how women are demonized for, get this, enjoying orgasm, right? Like they're not telling on themselves to the whole world by doing that. Well, in the ancient world, they did this to gods. So this next passage, they also burned down the homes of the male cult prostitutes and went in the temple of Yahweh, and the women were weaving ornaments for the Asherah. Now Asherah is being accused of being associated with temple prostitution and cult sex practices. The problem is, she is never depicted as being worshipped this way up until this very moment. Quite the contrary. Asherah was an ancient goddess of the highest order. She was a powerful intercessor for her husband and mediated disputes between other gods. Not only did she and her husband have 70 sons, and no telling how many daughters, but she had a role to play in creating the cosmos along with him through sexual union. I'm going to read a passage to you, and when I do, I want you to kind of use your imagination as to what's happening here. Jessica. Genesis 49, 22 to 26. Joseph has either El or Yahweh. I can kind of go either way at this point. Joseph is a fruitful branch, the fruitful branch by a spring. Its branches hung all over the walls. The archers provoked him and shot at him and were hostile towards him, but his bow remained firm. His bow remained firm. When was the last time you heard a bow described as being firm? Of course it's firm, it's a bow. You know what you call a bow that's not firm? Useless. No good to anybody. Broken. His arms were agile and his hands were mighty. Ladies. And by the Almighty who blesses you with blessings from the heaven above, blessings from the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. This is an epitaph to Asherah and Act. The blessings of your father have surpassed the blessings of your ancestors up to the furthest boundaries of the everlasting hills. They're having sex, you guys. Oh, and they're good at it too. And it was through that sexual union that they created the cosmos. Still not convinced about that. Proverbs 8. This is in the Bible. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his ways. Before his works of old, from everlasting I was established, from the beginning. From the earliest times of earth, when he established the heavens, I was there. Now, when confronted with this, Christians will often say that this is talking about Jesus. There's just one problem with that. At the beginning of the chapter, it tells us exactly what it is. Does not wisdom call and understanding lift up her voice? The very next chapter, Chapter 9. Wisdom has built her house. She has carved out her 7 pillars. She has prepared her food. She has mixed the wine. She has set up the table. She has set up the attendants. She calls out on the top of the heights of the city. Whoever is naive, let him turn him in here. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come eat of the food and drink of the wine I've mixed. Abandon your foolishness and live and perceive the ways of understanding. So this presents some obvious problems with saying that this is referring to Jesus as a pre-incarnate being. And if this is the hill you're willing to die on, then that means Jesus is trans.
Yep.
Don't get mad at me, I didn't write the Bible, I just wrote it.
Yep.
But as Yahweh's identity begins getting associated with more and more with El, we start seeing it's getting widely accepted that El is no longer, or Asherah is no longer El's consort, she becomes Yahweh's consort. As early as the 8th century BCE, we start seeing Yahweh being worshipped alongside Asherah instead of El. Here's a couple of examples. This is a pottery shard with the inscription on it. It says Yahweh and his Asherah. And here we have a burial inscription that seems to say that whoever was buried there was blessed by the prince and by Yahweh and Asherah. So then who was Baal? We talked about Baal earlier. Who was he? Well, Baal was a storm in warrior and fertility deity. Similar to El, he was also depicted as a bull. Even though he was a member of the pantheon, he was not a child of El and Asherah. He was a son of Bigot, which is a grain deity. It's also briefly mentioned in the Bible. And he seems to have been adopted into the pantheon along with his sister Anat. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go too much into Anat. She's a wild character. Even El says that there exists none among the goddesses with contempt like yours. She's described as a virgin and even threatens to kill El if he doesn't allow Baal to build a temple for himself. Like literally, she's like, I will drag you on the ground until your gore gets tangled up in your beard. And El's like, well, fuck, let's build a temple then. Let's get that going. El was a really chill guy. He didn't care about being worshipped like at all. He was more interested in mediating disputes between his family, which is a full-time job. So Baal kills a serpent named Lotan. This is straight from the Hebrew text. Again, it's probably 500 to 1,000 years earlier than Genesis. When you struck Lotan and the wriggling serpent, you finished off the writhing serpent, the powerful one with 7 heads. Sounds very similar to a passage in Isaiah 27. And that day, Yahweh will visit and punish the hard and great and strong sword upon Leviathan, the wriggling serpent, and upon Leviathan, the writhing serpent, and he will kill the monster that is in the sea. So here we see this common motif that's being passed down and changed a little bit, being adapted to be more relevant to their chosen God. He's also called Cloud Rider several times, and his sister Anat says of him, let Baal place his thunderbolt in the skies, let it make the lightning flash. In the Bible, Yahweh and El are described multiple times as coming from the clouds and riding on the heavens. And the Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the Most High uttered his voice. Hailstones and coals of fire set his arrows, and scattered them, the lightning flashes in abundance, and roused them. So these are storm motifs that are originally belonged to Baal, but are now being associated with Yahweh. Oh, Baal also dies, but stop me if you heard of this one. He comes back. And we celebrate his resurrection.
It's a whole new concept.
No, when he dies, El mourns his death. Also in the Baal cycle. We approached Baal and found him falling on the ground. The victorious Baal is dead. The prince, the lord of the earth, has died. Immediately the compassionate El stepped down from his throne. He threw ashes of mourning over his head and covered his body in sackcloth. He raised his head and yelled, Baal is dead. What will become of the earth? The son of Dagon is gone. What will happen to the masses? I will follow Baal into the earth. Very similar story to Genesis 37. They sent the multicolored tunic back that they brought to their fathers and said, we have found this. Please examine and see whether it is your son's tunic. Then he exclaimed and said, it is my son's tunic. The vicious animal has devoured him. Joseph, remember how Joseph was also, or El was also called Joseph, was surely torn to pieces. So Jacob tore his clothes and put on sackcloth undergarments around over his waist and mourned for his son many days. Then all the sons and daughters came up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son. Again, very similar story being adapted and changed over time. So we have all these very ancient poems and narratives within the biblical corpus that describe the numerous other gods whose divine attributes and roles are then used to describe Yahweh in the later biblical texts. How do we know these attributes are simulated into Yahweh's profile? Well, that's because we don't know anything about Yahweh prior to the Yahwistic cult's integration with other cultures. The best we can tell is he was a warrior deity. But other than that, we don't know much about him. Suddenly he starts becoming a storm deity as well. And then he becomes a fertility deity too. And then he becomes a grain deity. So you see how all these attributes are starting to absorb into him. So how did this happen? Well, the answer can be found in another biblical passage. This is also considered to be one of the oldest passages in the Bible. In the days of Sheol, the son of Anath, in the days of Israel, the roads were deserted. They traveled way by roundabout ways. The peasantry came to an end. They came to an end in Israel until I never arose, until I arose in the mother of Israel. New gods were chosen. There was war at the gates, not a shield was spared and seen among 40,000 Israel. Trade routes. This is how this happened. They were taking alternate trades, they were meeting alternate people, they were selling their slaves that would go and tell their slave masters about stories of their homeland. And so they started toying with all these different gods. And they didn't know what to do with all this information. So what they would do is they would perform pretty much experiments. They would offer a sacrifice to a certain god. If you're living in a desert and if there's a drought, you really need rain. Let's offer a sacrifice to this god, trying to get rain. Oh, that didn't work. Let's try again. But this time, let's maybe do it a little bit different. Maybe let's do it a different time of the day, see if that works. No, let's change the type of animal that we sacrificed. That still didn't work. We're getting kind of desperate. We're getting thirsty. It's the desert and this drought. Let's try offering a sacrifice to this other god we heard about. Maybe, what do we got to lose? We're about to die anyway. So we offer a sacrifice to this new god, and oh, it rains. Oh shit, this must be a stronger god than the one we were worshiping before. So that's how that worked. I'm going to share a quote from Dr. Dan McClellan's book, Yahweh's Divine Images, because I love the way he puts this. Because deities are not unique categories that occur in nature. There is no acid into which we can dip a text and see if deity is present. They are constructed and curated by individual cognition, by cultural evolution, and by social institutions. Which means the most direct answer to the question, what is deity, is rather simple, if a bit disappointing. A deity is whatever a group says a deity is. So basically, God is the Megazord. Or for the older generation, Voltron.
Woo! Wow!
I'm an elder millennial, I can do both. The difference, though, with the Yahwistic cult is rather than blaming God for not blessing them, they blamed themselves. They stopped looking for stronger gods to worship, and they started believing that their God is the one true God, and they just weren't sacrificing adequately enough. They weren't devoting themselves enough. So he was originally worshipped alongside other gods. It was all copacetic, no problems. Well, then they started thinking, hey, maybe worshiping these other gods are making him angry and making him punish us. So we need to stop worshiping these other gods. So they stopped, and then they eventually, before I read the passage earlier, they destroyed the Asherahs, they destroyed all the offerings to other gods, until it just became their God. And then, no matter what happened, I mentioned the Babylonian exile earlier, they were kicked out of their homeland. Even then, they're like, no, our God is punishing us for doing this. They started to think that their God was so strong that temples, arks, and sacrifices were just luxuries to him. He didn't even need those things. What he wanted was pure and unwavering devotion to him. And they've stuck that way throughout history. And just look at every single book in the New Testament has some variation of the phrase, the end is coming soon. Just hold on a little bit longer, because this was the belief. Yeah, it sucks right now, he's punishing us, but we're going to be victorious in the end. He's going to bless us in the end, either in this life or the next. So in every single book in the New Testament, you see him saying, the end is coming soon. Every single letter that Paul writes to his audience, he says, hold on just a little bit longer, you guys. It's coming, we're in the last hour, it's going to happen. And here we are 2,000 years later, and they're saying the same shit. The end is coming soon, just you wait and see. Every knee will bow and every tongue confess.
The ultimate
It's
answer.
actually really tragic. Heartbreaking. I often get asked, if I don't believe these things, why do I continue to read about them? Why do I continue to talk about them? It's a fair question. For one, it's because I do have one. So there's that. But it's also because it's been my own personal experience that when it comes to issues pertaining to religious indoctrination and religious trauma, there is no greater healing force than knowledge. If you're afraid of something, learn about it. I know a lot of atheists who maintain a fear of hell because they don't know that the Bible doesn't even have a concept of eternal torment. That idea comes from a 3rd century book called the Apocalypse of Peter that the early church deemed as a heresy. They threw out the whole book, but that one idea of being tortured forever in hell, they kept that. I know a lot of atheists that still have end times, rapture anxiety. because they don't realize that the book of Revelation almost did not make it into the Bible. In fact, the only reason it did is because of a bishop of Rome at the time, the 3rd century, his most powerful bishop at the time. His name was Athanasius. He saw the book of Revelation as a tool he could use to demonize his political opponents. That's why the book of Revelation is in our book today, that one reason. I know a lot of atheists who walk around with a perpetual feeling of guilt because of the doctrine of original sin, even though the doctrine of original sin was not first thought of until also the 3rd century by St. Augustus, because he couldn't explain why he was horny all of the time. That is a true story. I'm not making that up. That's where the doctrine of original sin came from. If you're afraid of something, learn about it. If there's something that haunts you, learn about it, and you will regain a power that it has taken from you. Even the great and powerful, when it's revealed that the great and powerful Wizard of Oz is just a bald guy with mommy issues, even the cowardly lion stops being afraid of him. Thank you. I've got about 12 minutes left. I try not to talk fast. Apparently I didn't. We can do Q&A. Y'all set up for that back there? You can tell me no, I won't have any.
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Yeah. Go easy on me.
No. Babe, you got one down front over there.
Hi.
Hey.
This is stuff that, the original origins of current Christianity, the Jews and so forth. This is well known to historians and has been for a very long time. I remember hearing about this when I was an undergraduate student in the 1980s in an ancient history class. Something similar, not exactly. So why do you think that religion has such a hold when the history behind this is so well known to historians? It has been for at least 100 years, maybe more.
That's a really good question. I don't think I can't come up with a definitive answer, but I have my own theories. What we see people doing today has been done for the past 2-3 centuries, or millennia. If you read the works of the early church, if you listen to apologists talk today, they're all like, the scientists, they got these things right, but they're wrong about their conclusion. Ray Comfort's really good at doing that. You see, if you go back to the writings of the early church fathers, most of them were like Hellenized Jewish philosophers. They were like former Neoplatonists. They say the same thing about philosophers. They'll be like, Apollonius was right about these things, but he was wrong about the conclusion. So it's the same. It's the same thing throughout history. It just looks a little bit different, sounds a little bit different. I think people are so married to this idea that they can't break themselves through to thinking that maybe they were wrong. And so they double down to the point where they sound ridiculous. Like, no, those gods were fake. This is the real one. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm just curious because, again, this is well known to historians.
It's infuriating.
Yeah, it's well known to
Yeah, like this is not new information. This is free. You can find this.
Yeah, I guess.
It just kind of, it's just kind of puzzling to me, and it's been, I understand maybe there's no different answers. Interested in your view on it, because, like I said, I took an ancient history class in college in the early '80s, and this was in it.
Yeah.
So it's not new, and I guess I just don't understand it. And maybe, like I said, maybe you have some insight. You've been dealing with this for a while.
I had something that's gone now. Maybe I'll think of it later, probably at 2 a.m. and I'll wake up in a cold sweat. Oh, that was the answer. Yeah, I think it's the best I can do for now. Is there another question?
Hi, long time again, first time caller. So I have the opinion that actually one of the most damaging forces in the world is inerrancy doctrine, and how not only do people apply that to the Bible, but then to the Constitution. So in your experience and education, what would you say are some of the most powerful tools to start kind of for people who are questioning and starting to deconstruct, to have them start looking and maybe consider that the Bible is not inerrant, and other documents as well?
Actually, I think that goes really well with the answer I was gonna give to that question. Oh my God, my brain just went blank. Well, for one, Christians don't read their Bible. They don't. Very, very few of them do. They get into church and they're told what the Bible says. They're told what to believe, and they're told that they have privilege now. They told that because you believe this, you're going to get promised eternal rewards in the afterlife. You're right no matter what. Anyone who argues with you is wrong, and they'll probably go to hell and die forever. But you can't expect them to go and read, the battle cycle. You're not going to get them to read Tertullian in the 2nd century. Like, they're not going to go read that stuff. So I think the best tool is things like TikTok. Because the difference between YouTube and TikTok is YouTube, you're looking up. You can feed your own biases. Look up whatever it is you're trying to reaffirm. Hey, I need a good apologetic argument for fine tuning, and then labeling Craig will pop up there and tell you what to say. But on TikTok, you're scrolling through, and then someone's just going to blurt out all this information. You're like, whoa, I didn't know any of that. That's really interesting. Let me look more into that. So I think just communication, putting the content out there, letting it lay where it does, and hopefully it'll be picked up by the right person, and it'll do some good. Other than that, I have more solid resources linked in my bio, my TikTok and Twitter and all that. But most people are not going to find them on their own. So I don't know, I say just keep doing what we're doing, because we're making progress. I do believe that. Any more? One question? Any more? You with the face.
I got him right here.
So, out of all the gods that you discussed in your presentation,
wait for
Mike, ask your opinion on which one you think the true God will be, and whether or not that's the flying spaghetti monster.
It's a unicorn. It's a magical unicorn.
It's the basement unicorn. Rachel was talking.
My allegiance lies with our Lord and Savior Cthulhu, so. Was that a genuine question? Because I'm not really sure how to answer if it was. Okay. Got time for maybe one or two more?
I missed the very, very beginning of this, and I imagine you engage with a lot of these folks. Do you ever just lead with enlightening them that Christianity isn't even in the Bible? The Bible is cited as a source for the theology and the metaphysics as proof of these theology and metaphysics. Metaphysics is Neoplatonic. It's not in those pages of that book. They just used it kind of post haste. They kind of after the fact they put it together and they use it. So I was just wondering if you ever bring up that with them.
As far as like contradictions and early worship, I'm not sure where you're going with the question. I'm sorry, can you phrase it a little bit?
Yeah, well, like I grew up a Catholic, and it wasn't until many years later and I left the faith that I realized, or I was looking and reading the Bible, that Catholicism, as we practiced it, is actually in Augustine. It's in people like
Gotcha.
Aquinas, you know what I mean? And some of these other folks you mentioned, it's not in the Bible itself.
But that's what Martin Luther, who was a massive piece of shit, but that was sort of what he did. Like in the early Catholic Church, you were not allowed to read the Bible. You were pretty much raised in. Martin Luther was seen as like a prodigy, so they were like, hey, they brought him into the priesthood and allowed him to read the Bible. And he started reading it, and he was like, wait a minute, none of this shit is in here. And that's what led to the Protestant Reformation. Specifically, the selling of indulgences was the big one that they had a problem with. But yeah, that's the problem with the Bible is there's so many words in it. There's so much poetry in it. So much loose and lackadaisical interpretations of the text. You can make the Bible say whatever you want it to say. That's why there's thousands of different denominations, and they all think they're right because they all think they're interpreting it right, and none of them are. None of them. But you get indoctrinated into a certain denomination, and that's the hill you're going to die on probably. It's weird. It's infuriating. It really is. Because when you start reading the Bible outside of the faith, it makes a lot more sense. And it's a lot more enjoyable. I really enjoy reading the Bible.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's far more fascinating than when I was a Christian. Before I was told what was in the Bible, and now I'm actually looking to see what is actually in it. It's so much more fun. It's a book of mythology. It's a book of history. Very, very little history actually, but it's still fun to see how people were interacting with the data that was available. Like I was saying, they were offering different sacrifices because that's all they could work with. They didn't have telescopes, they didn't have microscopes, they didn't have beakers. They were experimenting with what gods were blessing them. That's all they could do. That's all the information they had, and so they wrote about it. And so it's like, oh, this is where we came from. This is the kind of thinking that this religion came from, and it could have very easily been any other religion. But no, it was this one, and that's why we're sitting here. Don't know if that answered your question. I feel like I went off on a bit of a tangent there. But yeah, that's all the time I got. Thanks, you guys. If you have any more questions you want to talk, feel free to find me. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of the morning.